Don't come tonight. That's what Megan said while standing in the kitchen like she was mentioning something ordinary, like the weather or a grocery item we forgot to buy. She didn't sound nervous. She didn't hesitate. She just poured herself coffee, looked at her phone, and said it. Don't come tonight. For a second I thought I misheard her. I leaned against the counter and asked, Don't come where? She shrugged slightly, still scrolling. I'm meeting Kyle at a bar in Austin tonight. Kyle, her ex-boyfriend. The way she said his name was casual, almost routine, like she was mentioning a coworker she was grabbing lunch with. No awkwardness. No pause. Then she added the part that stuck in my head. It's just to catch up, she said. But seriously, don't come. Not you probably shouldn't come. Not it might be weird if you came. Just a clean, simple instruction. Don't come. I studied her face for a moment, waiting to see if there was any sign she realized how strange that sounded. There wasn't. She was completely comfortable saying it. I took a slow sip of coffee and tried to keep my voice even. Why not? She finally looked up from her phone. Because it's between me and him, she said. We haven't talked in a long time and we just want to clear the air. You being there would make it awkward. Her tone wasn't hostile. It was worse than that. It was dismissive. Like the explanation should have been obvious to me. Like I was the weird one for asking. Okay, I said after a moment. And that was it. No argument. No raised voices. Megan seemed relieved that I didn't push back. She grabbed her purse from the chair by the door and slipped her phone into it. I'll probably be late, she added casually. So don't wait up. That line landed heavier than the first one. Don't come tonight. Don't wait up. 2 sentences that said more about the state of our relationship than any long conversation ever could. She walked over and kissed my cheek before heading for the door. Love you, she said quickly. Then she was gone. The door shut behind her, and the apartment went quiet. I stood there for a moment staring at the spot where she'd been standing. And something about the silence felt different. Not dramatic, not explosive, just revealing. Because the truth was simple. She hadn't asked if I was okay with it. She hadn't even pretended to consider my feelings. She had already decided. In her mind, the situation was settled. She was meeting her ex-boyfriend, and I wasn't invited. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the coffee mug in my hands. It wasn't anger that I felt. Not really. It was more like a slow, uncomfortable realization working its way through my head. When someone feels comfortable telling you not to show up somewhere in their life, it means they've already made space for a version of their life without you in it. And that thought kept circling in my mind, because the timing of the whole thing was almost ridiculous. The day before that conversation, I had picked up the keys to a house. Not a rental. Not an apartment. A house. 3 bedrooms. Quiet neighborhood just outside Austin. Small backyard. Nothing flashy, but it was exactly the kind of place people start building a life in. I had been planning it for months. Saving money. Working extra hours. Talking with a realtor. The whole thing. And the entire time I had Megan in mind. The plan was simple. That night I was going to take her there. Show her the place. Hand her the spare key. I even imagined the moment in my head a dozen times. She'd probably look confused at first when we pulled up. Then excited when she realized what it was. I'd tell her I bought it for us. Not as some dramatic proposal or anything like that. Just a step forward. A future. But now I was sitting alone in our kitchen while she got ready to meet her ex at a bar I specifically wasn't allowed to go to. And the contrast between those 2 realities hit me harder than I expected. On one side of the situation was a house key sitting in my pocket. On the other side was my girlfriend telling me to stay away while she spent the evening with the guy she used to date. That's when something in my head shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It was quiet, clear. The kind of clarity that shows up when you finally see something exactly as it is. Because Megan didn't see the future the same way I did. If she had, she wouldn't be setting boundaries that excluded me from her life. She wouldn't be telling me where I wasn't allowed to go. And she definitely wouldn't be spending the evening with the one person most relationships naturally keep at a distance. I finished my coffee and set the mug down on the table. Then I pulled the house keys out of my pocket and placed them in front of me. They looked different now. Yesterday they had felt like the beginning of something. Now they felt like a question. A quiet one. The kind that asks whether the person you're building a future around is actually building the same future with you. And Megan had already answered that question without realizing it. All it took were 4 words. Don't come tonight. The strange thing about clarity is how quiet it feels. People imagine big emotional moments when relationships fall apart. Yelling, doors slamming, dramatic speeches. But that morning there was none of that. Just me sitting at the kitchen table staring at a pair of house keys that suddenly didn't belong to the life I thought I was building. I picked them up, turned them over in my hand, and thought about the previous afternoon. Walking through the empty house with the realtor. Sunlight coming through the living room windows. The smell of fresh paint. The quiet excitement I'd felt imagining Megan standing there next to me. She had no idea. That had been the whole point. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted the moment to feel natural, like the beginning of something bigger than both of us. But now all I could think about was her voice that morning. Don't come tonight. It wasn't the meeting with Kyle that bothered me the most. It was the certainty behind it. The assumption that I would simply accept being excluded. That realization changed the way the house keys felt in my hand. So instead of driving to work like I normally would, I pulled out my phone and called the realtor. She answered on the second ring. Hey Tyler, she said cheerfully. Everything still looking good for closing next week? I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Actually, I said slowly, I need to talk to you about that. There was a short pause on the line. Is something wrong? No, I said calmly. Just a change of plans. The words felt strange leaving my mouth. For months I had been moving toward that house like it was a destination. Now I was stepping away from it without hesitation. She asked a few routine questions. Was I sure? Did I want to postpone instead? Did something happen with financing? I gave simple answers. Yes, I'm sure. No, I don't want to postpone. Yes, please cancel everything. The process itself was surprisingly simple. A few forms. A confirmation email. My deposit returned within a few business days. 10 minutes after the phone call ended, the house I had planned our future around was gone. Just like that, I set my phone on the table and sat there for a moment. Oddly enough, I didn't feel regret. What I felt was relief. Because buying a house is easy. Building a life with someone who doesn't respect your place in it is not. And Megan had made it clear that morning exactly where I stood. Around noon, I walked into the bedroom and looked around. The apartment suddenly felt temporary. Like I was standing in a place I had already left mentally. Megan's things were scattered everywhere. Shoes near the closet. Makeup on the dresser. A half-finished coffee mug she had abandoned earlier. Normal, everyday things. But now they looked different. Because I realized something simple. This apartment wasn't really ours. It had always been hers. I was just living in it. The lease was in her name. Most of the furniture was hers. And until that morning, I had assumed we would eventually leave it together for something bigger. Now I knew that wasn't happening. So I did the most logical thing I could think of. I started packing. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just methodically. I pulled 2 suitcases out of the closet and began filling them with my clothes. Then books. Laptop equipment. A few framed photos. The things that were clearly mine. There was something almost peaceful about the process. Each item going into the suitcase felt like a small decision being finalized. By mid-afternoon, the apartment already looked different. My side of the closet was empty. The desk where I worked remotely was cleared off. Even the hallway felt wider, like the space itself understood what was happening. I carried the suitcases down to my car and loaded them into the trunk. Then I went back upstairs one last time. The apartment was quiet, exactly the same as it had been that morning after Megan left. Except now it felt like a place I no longer belonged. I walked into the kitchen and placed the apartment key on the table. For a moment I just looked at it sitting there. Felt strange leaving without a conversation. But at the same time it also felt right. Because the truth was simple. Megan had already ended the relationship in her own way. She just hadn't realized it yet. When someone tells you not to show up somewhere in their life, they're quietly telling you that your presence isn't necessary. And once you understand that, the next step becomes obvious. You stop showing up. I took one last look around the apartment. Then I walked out the door. The drive out of Austin happened faster than I expected. Maybe because I didn't have a destination in mind. I just knew I didn't want to stay in the same city that night. By early evening, I found a small roadside motel on the outskirts of San Antonio. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place with a clean bed and a working air conditioner. Exactly what I needed. I checked in, dropped my bags on the floor, and sat on the edge of the bed. That was the first moment all day where things finally felt real. Because somewhere in Austin, Megan was probably sitting across from Kyle in a bar, laughing, talking about old memories, completely unaware that our apartment was now half empty. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Her name appeared on the screen. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I reached over, held the power button, and turned the phone off. Not out of anger, not to punish her, but because I already knew how the conversation would go. She would explain. She would minimize. She would tell me I misunderstood. And none of that would change the only part that mattered. She told me not to come. So I didn't. Not to the bar. Not back to the apartment. Not back into the relationship. And for the first time all day, the quiet in the room felt peaceful. Megan probably expected a normal night. Couple of drinks. Some nostalgia. Maybe a long conversation about closure or whatever people call it when they reopen old doors. What she definitely didn't expect was to come home to silence. I imagined the moment later that night. The way the key would turn in the lock. The small pause when she stepped inside. At first nothing would seem strange. The lights were probably still off. The apartment quiet. Then she'd walk a little farther in and start noticing the details. My shoes gone from the hallway. The desk in the corner empty. The closet half cleared. And the kitchen table with one single object sitting on it. The key. My key. I didn't see that moment happen, but I knew Megan well enough to picture it. She wasn't someone who handled surprises well, especially not the kind that removed control from the situation. At some point she would pull out her phone and call me. That part one knew for sure. And sure enough, around midnight my phone buzzed on the motel nightstand. I hadn't turned it back on until a few minutes earlier. Her name lit up the screen. Megan. For a moment I just stared at it. Then I answered. Hello. There was a second of silence on the other end. Then her voice came through, sharp and confused. Tyler. Where are you? San Antonio, I said. Another pause. What do you mean San Antonio? She asked. Why are you there? I leaned back against the headboard and looked at the dim motel ceiling. I left Austin. What are you talking about? She said quickly. I just got home and all your stuff is gone. That's right. The confusion in her voice started shifting toward panic. You moved out? She asked. Why would you move out? I kept my tone calm. You told me not to come tonight. That's not the same thing, she snapped. Maybe not to you, I said. But it told me enough. There was movement on her end of the phone. I could hear her walking through the apartment. Drawers opening. Cabinet doors. You're seriously leaving because I met Kyle for a drink? She said. No. Then what is this about? I let a few seconds pass before answering. It's about the fact that you felt comfortable telling me not to show up in your life tonight. That's ridiculous, she said immediately. It was just a conversation. Maybe. So you just disappear? She continued. You don't even talk to me first? We're talking now. Her frustration started bleeding through the phone. You're overreacting, she said. You always do this when something makes you uncomfortable. That sentence actually made me smile a little, because it was exactly the kind of response I expected. Minimize, redirect, make the other person seem emotional. I'm not overreacting, I said calmly. I'm adjusting. To what? To the reality of the situation. And what reality is that? She asked. That I shouldn't be building a future with someone who asks me to stay out of parts of her life. The apartment on her end went quiet. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said something softer. You could have just talked to me, Tyler. I did. When? This morning. That wasn't a conversation, she said. I just told you my plans. Exactly. The silence that followed was different. Not angry, just heavy. Finally, she spoke again. So what happens now? I thought about the house keys earlier that day. About the call to the realtor. About the suitcases in my car. It's over, I said. Her reaction was immediate. You're breaking up with me because I had a drink with my ex? No, I said again. I'm ending it because you made it clear I wasn't part of your life tonight. That's insane. Maybe. You're throwing away our relationship over one sentence. No, I said quietly. I'm respecting it. She didn't like that answer. I could hear her breathing change. You're being dramatic, she said. You could come back tomorrow and we can talk about this like adults. I'm not coming back. So what, you're just going to vanish? She demanded. I already did. Tyler, I hope the conversation with Kyle went well, I interrupted. That stopped her. You're unbelievable, she said finally. Maybe. Are you really doing this? Yes. Another long silence. Then her voice dropped lower. You're going to regret this. I don't think so. You don't even know what we talked about tonight. You're right, I said. And you don't want to know? No. Why? Because it doesn't matter. That seemed to frustrate her even more than the breakup itself. You're acting like I cheated on you, she said. I didn't say that. Then why are you leaving? Because I realized something today. What? That when someone tells you not to show up, the best response is to respect the request. She didn't answer. The phone line stayed quiet for several seconds. Then she said one last thing. You're making a huge mistake. Maybe. But mistakes are easier to live with than staying somewhere you're clearly not wanted. I hope things work out for you, I said, and then I hung up. The first call came the next morning. I was still in the motel room outside San Antonio, sitting by the window with a cup of bad coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the previous decade. My phone buzzed. Megan. I let it ring. It stopped. Then started again. Same name. Same number. I didn't answer. Eventually it stopped. For about 10 minutes. Then the phone buzzed again. This time it was a different number. I stared at the screen for a second. Unknown. I already knew who it was. I answered anyway. Hello, Tyler. Her voice. She sounded tired. Why are you calling from another number? I asked. Because you're ignoring my calls. I'm not ignoring them, I said calmly. I'm choosing not to answer. That's the same thing. Not really. There was a long pause. You can't just disappear like this, she said. I didn't disappear. You left the city in the middle of the night. You told me not to come. That doesn't mean leave Austin. Maybe not to you. I could hear frustration building on her end again. You're twisting this. No. You're punishing me. I'm removing myself. Why? She demanded. Because you made it clear I wasn't needed. That's not true. You told me not to show up. That was one night, she said. And I responded once. Her breathing became sharper. You're acting like a child. Maybe. You're seriously going to throw away 2 years over this? I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. No. Then what is this? It's a boundary. That word seemed to irritate her more than anything else. You're not setting a boundary, she snapped. You're running away. Maybe that's how it looks from your side. And from your side? From my side, I said. I'm leaving a situation where I'm clearly optional. That ended the conversation. She hung up without another word. The messages started about an hour later. First texts, then missed calls, then voicemails. I didn't listen to most of them, but the pattern was obvious. At first she was angry, then defensive, then apologetic. By mid-afternoon the tone shifted again. That's when her friends started contacting me. The first one was Amanda. She texted, "Hey Tyler, Megan's really upset. Can you call her?" I didn't respond. 20 minutes later, another message arrived. Different name. Jared. "Dude, what happened? Megan says you just disappeared." I set the phone down and turned it face down on the table. Because something about the whole thing felt familiar. Not the situation itself, but the strategy. When someone loses control of a situation, they start recruiting other people to apply pressure. Friends, family, anyone who can help push the situation back into a direction they prefer. It's not always malicious. Sometimes people just want to fix things. But the effect is the same. Noise, distraction, pressure. And I wasn't interested in any of it. So I left the phone where it was. Face down. Silent. By the time evening rolled around, I'd made another quiet decision. I wasn't going back to Austin. Not right away. Maybe not at all. The truth was, the city suddenly felt smaller. Like every street carried a memory that no longer belonged to me. So instead of driving north the next morning, I headed west. No plan. No deadline. Just distance. I stopped for gas outside Kerrville and sat in the car for a few minutes watching the highway traffic pass. My phone buzzed again. I checked it this time. 8 missed calls. 3 voicemails. 2 more texts from Megan. The last one read, "Can we just talk like normal people?" I stared at the message for a moment, then locked the phone and placed it back on the passenger seat. Because the truth was simple. We had already talked. She just didn't like the outcome. Over the next few days, the calls slowed down. The texts became less frequent. Her friends stopped reaching out. Eventually, the noise faded. And with it, something else faded too. The constant feeling that I needed to explain myself. Because the reality of the situation was actually very simple. She told me not to come. So I didn't. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever again. 3 months later, I was standing in a bar in Denver. Which is the funny part of life. You never know when a story is actually over. Sometimes it just takes a few months before the final chapter shows up unexpectedly. The place was small. Dim lights. Low music. The kind of bar people go to when they want conversation instead of noise. I was halfway through a drink when I heard a voice behind me. "Tyler." I turned. And there she was. Megan. Standing a few feet away like she had just walked into a memory she wasn't prepared to see. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that almost made me laugh. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." I shrugged. "Neither did I." She looked different. Not dramatically. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from learning something the hard way. "Can we talk?" she asked. I thought about it for a second. Then nodded. "Sure." Because sometimes closure isn't something you go looking for. Sometimes it just walks into the room when you least expect it. For a few seconds, Megan just stood there looking at me like she wasn't sure whether to smile or apologize first. Finally, she settled for something in between. "You look different," she said. "Denver will do that," I replied. She gave a small laugh, but it faded quickly. The moment between us wasn't comfortable enough for jokes. The bartender slid my drink across the counter, and I took a sip while Megan glanced around the room, clearly trying to gather her thoughts. "I didn't know you moved here," she said. "I didn't," I answered. "Just visiting." "Oh." Another small pause. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, then looked back at me. "I heard you left Austin completely." "Yeah." That was sudden. It felt pretty straightforward from my side. She nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I guess it probably did." For a moment she stared down at the bar top. Then she said the thing I had expected from the moment I saw her walk over. "I made a mistake." The words didn't surprise me, but hearing them still carried a certain weight. "A mistake?" I asked. "With Kyle," she said. "With that whole night." I didn't respond right away. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I had already moved past the part of the story where apologies mattered. She noticed the silence. "He reached out a few weeks before that," she continued. "I thought meeting him would give me closure." "And did it?" I asked. She let out a slow breath. No. What happened? We talked for hours, she said. At first it felt like old times. Familiar. Her eyes flicked up toward mine. But then I realized something halfway through the night. What? That the person I used to date doesn't exist anymore. That tends to happen, I said. She nodded again. Yeah. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, when I got home that night and saw the apartment empty, I realized I'd lost something else too. Me, I said. Yeah. Her voice was softer now. I didn't think you'd actually leave. That part seems to surprise people, I said. She gave a faint, sad smile. I thought you'd argue, or wait for me to come back. That wouldn't have changed anything. I know that now. The music in the bar shifted to a slower song while the conversation hung between us. Megan finally looked up again. I tried calling you for weeks, she said. I know. You blocked me. I needed distance. You disappeared, she said. You asked me to. Her expression tightened slightly. That's not fair. Maybe not. But you know that's not what I meant. I know what you said, I replied calmly. And that was the real dividing line between us. What she meant, and what she actually said. She took a deep breath and leaned against the bar. I wish I could go back and redo that day, she said. That's not how time works. I know. I'm glad you do now. Her eyes searched my face for something. Forgiveness, anger, anything. But there wasn't much there. Just calm. You really moved on, she said finally. Yes. That fast. It wasn't fast, I said. It just started earlier than you realized. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I started leaving the moment you told me not to come. That seemed to land harder than the breakup itself. She looked away for a moment. I didn't understand what I was risking, she said quietly. Most people don't. I thought you'd still be there. I wasn't. The conversation drifted into silence again. Around us the bar kept moving normally, people laughing, glasses clinking, music playing. But the space between Megan and me felt strangely separate from all of it. Finally she spoke again. Do you think we could start over? The question didn't surprise me. It was the last step in a story like this. Apology, regret, attempted return. I finished my drink before answering. No. She looked down at the bar. I figured you'd say that. It's not personal. It feels personal. It's just logical. How? Because relationships don't reset like video games, I said. You can't go back to the beginning after the story changes. And the story changed that night. Yes. She nodded slowly. Tears were forming in the corners of her eyes now, but she didn't let them fall. I lost everything because of one stupid decision, she said. Not one decision, I corrected gently. What do you mean? It wasn't just meeting Kyle. Then what was it? It was the moment you decided I didn't belong there. That seemed to hit her harder than anything else I'd said. She pressed her lips together and looked away again. Yeah, she whispered. After a few seconds she straightened up. Well, she said, forcing a small smile. I guess this is the part where you walk away. Probably. She nodded. Tyler. Yeah. I really am sorry. I believe you. That seemed to mean something to her. Take care of yourself, she said. You too. I set a few bills on the bar, turned, and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. Not because I was angry, not because I hated her, but because the story between us had already reached its natural ending months earlier. All I had done that night in Austin was accept the role she gave me. She told me not to come, so I didn't. And sometimes the simplest decisions are the ones that change everything. After that night in Denver, Megan and I never spoke again. There were no more messages, no late-night apologies, no attempts to reopen the conversation. Whatever needed to be said had already been said in that bar. Over the next few months, life kept moving in the quiet way it always does after something ends for real. I went back to my normal routine. Work, new cities, new people. the kind of steady forward motion that only happens when you stop looking over your shoulder. Once in a while, a mutual friend from Austin would mention Megan in passing. Nothing dramatic, just small updates about life continuing. Apparently she moved apartments, changed jobs, started over in her own way. And honestly, I hoped it worked out for her. Not because I wanted to reconnect, but because the lesson that ended our relationship probably taught both of us something valuable. Some people think breakups are about anger, but most of the time they're about clarity. And clarity rarely arrives in comfortable ways. Looking back now, the whole situation feels strangely simple. People often ask what the real problem was. Kyle wasn't the real problem. The bar wasn't the real problem. Even that night in Austin wasn't the real problem. The real problem was a single moment where one person assumed the other would always stay. Megan thought I'd still be there when she got home, waiting, arguing, trying to fix things. Instead, I listened carefully to what she said. Don't come tonight. So I didn't. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever again. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing a person can do in a relationship. Not fight harder. Not argue louder. Just quietly accept the role they've been given and step out of the story completely.